it's already started. This. Call to order the Thursday, October 3, 2024 Brandon Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We'll have a roll call, please.
Megan.
Here.
Brian.
Present.
Brooks.
Here.
Rob. Here. Alyssa.
Here.
Michael.
Here.
And Barb.
Barb is not here. She usually runs the meetings, and so I am running the meeting in her stead. Okay, so I will entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
I'd bring so move. No, second.
A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 19 meeting. I noticed one typo, and I will, mention that here. When we were talking about the home occupancy, toward the bottom of that paragraph, it says the applicant has since withdrew. The word should be withdrawn. Just a typo, I think. And I didn't see anything else, so I will move that we approve the minutes with that change.
Second. Shoneman.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Okay. Any public comments? This is the portion of our meeting where we will listen to any public comments. I don't see anyone rushing up to the podium, so we'll go on to our next.
I have one. On behalf of staff, I'm sure Barb will come back and watch this meeting. So just on behalf of staff that's here and at home tonight, our thoughts are with you and your family.
That is true. Yep. Minutes, public comment. Okay, and now we are up to number 6, our discussion items first. We are going to talk about building signage. The Hockey Association is hoping to put up signs that are larger than what our ordinances currently allow, and we have been talking about whether we should amend our ordinances. So Patrick, maybe you can bring us up to date.
Yep. So at the last meeting, you all wanted me to go out and find out what other places do. The first one on here is the city of Sioux Falls, particularly the Shields Iceplex up there. That land is owned by Sanford Health. So here's, starting on page 7, is kind of what they do. Then Minnehaha County's regulations follow that. Then Brookings, which I guess Vermilion's next. And if you look, it's just the Vermilion zoning map, which they have it hashed out because USD is a state college. Cities generally do not regulate state land, just how states don't regulate federal land. And the same, I included Brookings stuff in there as well, but they would be in the same boat. Finally, I included Yankton just because Mount Marty is a private college and they do have athletic facilities, so that is a bit different than Vermilion or USD or Brookings. So just a couple of examples of what other places do.
So I tried to read through all these and it made my head hurt. But one thing that I did kind of notice is that, unless I'm reading it wrong, what we allow for signs is a little bit more generous than what Sioux Falls allows. Also what Minnehaha County allows, unless I was reading it wrong. I did find that each of those places, under whatever circumstances, will allow signs based on the size of the building rather than on the size of the road frontage, which I thought might be interesting for us to talk about.
do you see the calculation for the size of the building?
Oh golly gee, let's see. In Sioux Falls, it was 1 square foot of signage per 1 linear foot of building. Now where,
It might be it right at the top under A. It looks like the second sentence.
for Minnehaha County, it was 1 square foot of signage per 2 lineal feet of building.
I'm glad you said that because since it says building frontage, I think I went past the building, the word building, and I just thought it was the same as us saying frontage, thinking street. So
Oh,
I'm glad you
yeah.
actually pointed that out.
Sioux Falls is, ours is 1 per 3 lineal, or sorry, 3 square feet per 1 linear foot of street frontage.
Yes.
So in Brandon, you only need 67 linear feet of property frontage for a 200 square foot sign. In Sioux Falls, you would need 400 linear feet of property frontage for 1 square footage for a 200 square foot sign.
Yeah.
However, Sioux Falls does not max out the size like we do. We max ours out at 200. And then Sioux Falls also has the allowance for multiple tenants. And like you, after that, they got really lengthy and really complicated. And I didn't read all, but 20 some pages of it.
For reference, so if we did go off of the building frontage, do you know the frontage on the hockey building? Do you know what the side is then?
Yeah, I think it was 148, but the lot extends past where the frontage is. The frontage goes to about halfway point on the lot. So conceptually, if that was ever completed, they would, without the cap, it would probably double.
So, according to Sioux Falls here, it's a 1 square foot per 1 lineal foot of building. And you said building 148? So that's still less than 200, so,
But then you'd have multiple sides potentially,
Mhm.
right? So you'd get, if you had 150 and you put signs on 2 sides, you'd be more than our 200. Is it something like that? Are we getting in a ballpark that works for you?
we come up, yeah, sorry. Push the button and say your name and address, please.
Tom Grunick, 1901 South Archstone, president of Brandon Valley Hockey.
Yep.
That's the problem with the ordinance, is it only allows for 1 sign, a maximum of 200. We'd like to do 2 signs,
Yeah,
that's the issue.
you'd like a sign in the front and then one in the back that will face Split Rock Boulevard or
Correct, yep.
Highway 11, however you
Yep.
want to say it.
Thank you again for all your work
Yeah.
with this. Patrick, I have a question here. If we went with something like with a building thing, how do we address like the ball diamonds or something like that where they have signs too?
So, as far as I know, the ball diamonds are actually owned by the city. So, there's an exception in the sign ordinances for signs put up by the city are exempt. So that would apply to the water tower, that would apply to. Whether it applies to the school district or not, we'd have to probably think about, wow, that's governmental. Yeah. But since this is a nonprofit, it's a bit different than the ball diamonds.
That's
Or the water treatment plant or the pool.
That's good, because I'm like, how do you calculate something like that? Because that's not a building, but it's a got signs, so, okay, that helps with that, so, cause it'd be nice to kind of figure something out while we're discussing it that works for at least the current situations that we have, if we're gonna go down that road.
One thing as I was looking at this that came back, and I think I mentioned this, or I know it was mentioned on this committee early on, at least when we first discussed this. You know, if you look at central business and general business for the sign regulations for wall, roof, or projecting signs, we have a 1 square foot of sign per 1 foot of frontage, linear foot of frontage with a max of 200 feet. When light industrial and heavy industrial, we have the same for wall, roof, and projecting signs. We have 1 square foot of sign per 1 linear foot of frontage, 200 square foot max. And then in institutional, of course, we have the 3 feet of square feet of sign per 1 linear foot of signage, but we still have the max of 200. So it seems like our intent was to allow more signage. So to me, that brings me back to that maximum of why would we have a bigger allowance of 3 square feet per frontage and then keep the same cap? I mean, to me, that's, I know there's been some support for keeping it there, but to me, it seems like maybe our intent was to allow a little more signage. So that's one thing to consider. As far as the 1 sign, I'm trying to remember where that's carved out, because in the section, I think it's 15.15.8 or 15, in the sign regulations under item 8 for industrial, it says wall, roof, and projecting signs, plural, shall be permitted as long as their cumulative area does not exceed 3 square feet per 1 foot of linear space. But there may be somewhere else that calls out the limit of 1 sign. I just don't have that in front of me, so if anybody knows that.
My interpretation is the same as yours. I don't believe there is a limit on the number of signs. You could have 200 1 square foot signs.
So I'll go just one step further and just say that I think, in looking at this more, I think for me, I would support looking at raising that maximum in the industrial zone. Or, I'm sorry, institutional. I was thinking IN. Institutional zone.
So, if I recall correctly, I think when we had the conversations about the different, instead of the 1-to-1, we went with the 1-to-3 because there was some current existing unique conditions, such as the church by Casey's, where they have a very large lot, very large building, but very, very small frontage. They have very small frontage on Holly and very small frontage along Sioux Boulevard there. And so I think those were some of the reasons why, or one of the examples of why we went to the 3 square feet of signage for 1 linear foot of frontage. My concern is if we don't put a max on this, you get situations, to me, relatively, the hockey building's not that large when you compare it to, say, the high school or a new elementary school. And if we start looking at, well, hockey's, 100 feet wide. 100 feet's not that big. I don't know, I haven't measured this school, but I'm guessing that's probably 400 feet of frontage just on one side. And then it also has frontage on Holly. So if we were to start to apply the same rules unanimously to everybody, we could have some outlandish size signs. So if we, you know, if we try to do something like that without a maximum, we really open the floodgates up to some odd possibilities. So I'm a proponent of providing a max.
Oops, would you consider raising it from 200, and if so, what would you suggest?
Or even if we added in where they could allow the building frontage as a calculation, you could still have the 200 square foot maximum, but say that's maximum per side. On a building like that, you're not going to be viewing two sides very easily at the same time, so it's not like it's, I think the reason for limiting signs is so that you're not thrown back, but if you're talking about a big building, you're only gonna be looking at one side at a time, so if we did, you know, a building calculation and you still limited it to 200, but it's 200 per side.
Yeah, at the last meeting, you know, I gave some examples of, you know, per this ordinance, it's per lot. And that's almost impossible to do and fall within the ordinance. You know, you look at Aspen Park, for example, we're talking hockey as one building. How many buildings are there on that lot? And the entire lot would be limited to 200 square feet. So I suggested we do it per building on that lot. And then also suggested that maybe, you know, to multiple sides. You know, churches could be the same thing. You might have a church with a school on that property. The high school is another example where you have, well, one time we had a high school, we had a middle school, we had a separate vocational building, we had a football complex, we had a bus barn, all on one lot. And per our ordinance, all of those buildings cumulative would be limited to 200 square feet.
I guess the only thing I'd say to that is unless we kind of give a pass on schools like we do the city where they have they're figured differently. Is there any limit then on city, or is it just, how do they regulate that?
So signs not regulated, D on roughly page 89 of the zoning code says, the following signs may be allowed in addition to the signs permitted by this ordinance. They do not require a sign permit, but must be in conformance with all federal, state, and local laws. Number 4 is signs regulated, approved, or otherwise required by a state or federal agencies, including outlet store or marker signs. 3 is signs erected by a city or any other governmental entity. So I imagine that would probably apply to a public school district. A school district is generally, I believe, a governmental entity. It would probably not apply to a private school, but it would a public school.
So I think that solves a little bit of the problem with the schools in the city, but we still need to address other structures on institutional, such as churches or Aspen Park, and there could be other things that will come up in institutional. So we certainly want to address those, but I don't think we have to get too deep in the woods with the school side of it, I guess. But I think kind of going down the road of allowing a building frontage calculation with a maximum per side. I don't know if we want to allow that on all 4 sides or only 2 sides or 3 sides. I don't know how we want to do that, but I think a per side maximum would be kind of the direction I would lean towards.
I would say 2 sides minimum, and you can, or maximum, sorry, and I would say you can pick the 2 sides, whatever, however you want it, because you might have street frontage on 2 sides,
Corner lot.
or
like the hockey building, that would be, on this calculation, it'd be 150 per side, but if they expand and get bigger, they might be able to make that up to 200. You know, if they went over 200 feet long, you know, but, so you would still be limited by your building too. If you're only 100 square foot or 100 long building, you're only gonna have a 100 square foot sign, so.
I mean, going back to like building sizes, it's in heavy industrial, but the engineered truss building that just got built recently, that's a long building and big. And I don't know how big that sign is on there. I don't know if they went max or not, but it's not, you can read it from the road and it's set back quite a ways still. So I don't know what they made that sign, but it's visibly readable, so.
So, Patrick, you mentioned that schools are not, this is not enforceable for schools. I thought we had to address our ordinance when the school wanted to put up the billboard at the football field. Or sorry, the scoreboard at the football field.
How long ago was this? I might not have direct knowledge of it.
Oh man, what was it, 8 years ago?
Okay, I would not then, but.
6 to 8 years ago?
I don't know if the old sign code did not have that exemption, maybe?
No, I think we had just finished our sign ordinance, our update to the signage ordinance, and then had to address it again because of the Booster Club donating the new scoreboard at the football field.
Yeah. I do remember vaguely that it was a discussion. I don't have all the facts. You know, but I do remember it was part of the discussion. The calculations could have been a little different, but it wasn't an institutional zone at that time. It was probably an R1. You remember that? I think it was. I think it was a school, maybe an R1, but.
I guess what I would suggest is we keep it the way it is, but add verbiage in there, you know, not to exceed 200 square feet per building, so that if there's multiple buildings on the site, they can each have their sign
Per
and
building or per,
per building. So say at Aspen Park, we have multiple building structures. They can each have 200 square feet of signage. Same thing with the high school, same thing with a church. If a church has an elementary school, a sanctuary, you know, they may have a community type facility on it, that each of those structures could have up to the 200 square feet.
but then the hockey building would be limited to 200 square feet total, or?
And then, I wasn't done, but.
I'm sorry,
And then up to 2 frontages.
sorry.
So basically 400 square feet per building, as long as they're not on the same frontage.
Would you not use a building calculation then, linear frontage on the building? Because the hockey association only, they don't technically have any frontage. We gave them a variance to use frontage for calculation, but they don't technically have any frontage, so.
Well, Aspen Park does have frontage, has at least 67 feet of frontage. And so that would qualify for the 200 square feet.
So.
And then we can put it on any building. We can put it on the water treatment plant, we can put it on the swimming pool, we can put it on the hockey building, we can put it on the wellness building, we can put it on the concession stand.
So then the hockey building would still be limited. They wouldn't have 2 sides that they could use. They could only use 1 side.
No, I'm suggesting that they can put it on 2 sides of their building as long as those sides face different street frontages. So if they want to put one on the back facing the highway, and they want to put one on the northwest side facing Aspen Drive going through the park, they could do so.
The
The
thing
multiplier would still be 3. Correct. The multiplier would still be 3
thing I like about the building frontage calculation is on a smaller building, you wouldn't, you'd still be proportionate to the building. So you'd still be limited to either 200 for the building total, or if it's, let's say it's a 50-foot by 50-foot building, you could have 200 total. And then if, once you got over 100 by 100, you'd start being able to go to a bigger sign on each side up until you get a 200 square foot or 200 long building. Otherwise, if you get a smaller building and you say you can have 200 on each side, then all of a sudden you have 400 square feet or 300 square feet, or however. But you'd have, on a smaller building, you have a bigger impact for the size of the building.
But even on a 1-to-1, say we did, 1 square feet per 1 linear feet of building facade, if they're 100 feet wide on their entrance side, that's only 100 square feet of signage.
But then they could still use the 200 total, and you could put that where you want. But if you, once you get bigger than 100 foot long building, then you start to expand over the 200 up until you get 200 on each side. Does that make sense? So if you're 100 foot long by 100 foot long, you can have 200 for your building, and you can put that wherever you want for that 200 feet. But you can't put 200 on one side and 200 on the other side until you get to a 200 foot building. Then you can put 200 on one side and 200 on the other side. Because you could either use the 200 square foot, or you start using the 1 foot calculation. So I'm just thinking that on a smaller building, if you put 200 on each side, that could be quite a bit versus having to build up to that depending on the size of your building.
My concern with the linear frontage is, how do you calculate that on things like the football stadium, a baseball stadium?
Those are city owned, so we wouldn't be calculating those anyway. If they were private, I guess if we ran into a privately owned situation, we might have to address that, but currently that'd be all under school, which we're giving a waiver to.
The writing we have here, the proposed writing we have here, says that, the maximum number being 200 square feet may be increased by conditional use permit. How do you guys feel about that?
So that's the language that was presented last time. It was just transferred over. Nothing's new there.
The first time we brought this up, I kind of mentioned if we did a conditional use, that way we could kind of look at it, but our discussion last time, Brian's concern was, well, what's our standard? How do we look at one versus the next one? And I can agree that it'd be nice to just say, well, if something comes up here, we'll be consistent, but that's really hard to do without something to weigh it against. Where you're looking at, if you have a bigger building, you get a little bigger sign, more frontage, you get a bigger sign. The advantage of having frontage and getting a bigger sign is you're stretching out your property, so your impact to your adjacent properties is less. And the advantage of having a building frontage calculation is if you have a bigger building, a 200 square foot building on a building that's 200 square feet or 200 feet long is not as imposing as a 200 square foot sign on a 50 foot long building. So I think kind of a combination of the two could have 200 feet on any building on two sides, that we double the amount of signage. And on smaller buildings, I think that could be a little bit more impact than we want.
So I guess one thing to consider is our minimum size of our lot, minimum lot area of 1 acre, and minimum lot width of 60 feet. So basically, every institutional lot is gonna qualify for 200. And we're not talking, small lots, we're talking, what, 3 to 4 standard size residential lots, 75 feet by 100 feet.
But we don't want, maybe I'm on the wrong page here. Are you saying though that on an institutional, we would allow a 200-foot sign on up to two sides, regardless of the size of the building?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Because then you could have a small building. If you're not saying that there's any calculation with the building size, you could have a really small building with really big signs. You can have, the RC track could put up a little mechanic shop, and the whole thing could be signs, and the hockey association is limited to 200 each side. So without a building calculation, we double the signage on a small building, but we double it on a big building too, but we're talking about totally different structures. So I think, I guess I see that there should be some building calculation in there. Otherwise, you can have a small building with a big sign. Because you're gonna have the same frontage. We're talking about Aspen Park has the same frontage, so that calculation is the same if we're not throwing in something to limit a small buildings, is my concern.
Let's say we had a RC park that was an acre in size, and we restrict it to, and they put up a little shed. Maybe it's the size of this room, and it's 30 feet, so then we're gonna give them a 30 square foot sign, even though they're sitting on an acre of land. That might have bleachers and a track area and parking, and nobody's gonna see it. So there's pluses and minuses to both. Not everything in an institutional zone is a building. A lot of these are sporting complex type facilities, or outdoor type of items. It's not just buildings as we think of in business type occupancies.
But they would still have, so you could use it either, there's two different things. So let's say the RC track. They could use either frontage, street frontage, or building frontage. It's a small facility, so they would use the street frontage calculation. They're still in the same parcel as the hockey association, so they still have over an acre lot. So if they use the street frontage, they'd have a 200 square foot sign. That should be enough for the RC track. The hockey association has a bigger building, so they opt to use the building frontage calculation. So because they have a bigger building, they get the linear foot of the building, so they're at about 150 feet, and we're allowing them to put that 150 feet on two sides. So because they have a bigger building, now instead of 200 square foot that the RC track gets, their bigger building, they get 300 square foot because they have two sides that they can put it on. So it's a bigger building. They get 300 RC. They get 200. There's two different calculations there. You can either use the street frontage or the building frontage. And when you get a bigger building, you can build up to get a bigger sign. just jumping to 200 on two sides, regardless of the building size, that's a big jump. We just double the signage versus a regular business.
But then to me, we're restricting more than what we have now by doing that to a point. Because otherwise, how do you pick which way to go? Like if they come into Paul and they go, well, we're going to go off our building size instead of the street frontage so we can get a little bit bigger sign. And that's up to Paul's discretion then on which way they should go.
Why don't we just say if a building is over a certain size, then they can put two signs up? Whether it's footprint or, surface area.
I think the linear foot calculation does that. And I think, it doesn't, if we said you could do 200 square foot maximum, that's where we're at right now. So you still get that. If you go by the frontage, you still get that. But if your building gets big enough, then you get a bigger sign. So if your building is only 30 by 30, you aren't big enough to get additional square footage on your sign. You're still at the 200. But if it's 100 by 100, then 100 by 100, you're at 200 square foot. But once you get bigger than that, then you get bigger signage, and you can put it on two sides. So if you're 200 by 200, then you can have 200 on two sides. If you're 100 by 200, on the 100 side, you get 100 feet. On the 200, you get 200 feet. And we allow it up to 200 feet per side. So as your building gets bigger, your signage gets bigger.
What if your building's only 55 feet wide, you only get 55 square feet?
You'd probably go by the frontage calculation, so you'd get 200 square foot for your building. You can put that where you want, but you're at 200 square foot maximum, which is what we're allowing now. So you're not getting reduced anywhere. You're getting what we're currently allowing, but as your building grows, your signage opportunity grows. Because it's not as imposing to have a 200 square foot sign on a building that's 500 feet long as it is a 20-foot building. So we're not limiting anything from what we currently have. We would only expand if your building expands enough. So that calculation allows you to get bigger, and we could say you can have up to 200 square foot per side on two sides. But we're not penalizing anyone, because you could still use the frontage calculation, so you get the 200 square foot max on a smaller building, and you can put that 51 foot or 101 foot signs, or whatever it is, or one sign, two signs, whatever, and you can do what you want with that, how it currently is. But if your building expands over 100 by 100, then you start to see the benefits of a larger sign. But until then, you're restricted to our current maximum.
How do we put that in words?
Would it be similar to the Sioux Falls language?
Yeah, it would just be, you could use either the frontage calculation or the linear foot calculation, and we would allow signage on, if you use the linear foot calculation, we would allow signage on two sides up to 200 square foot at a rate of 1 foot per linear foot of building frontage.
So you're still allowing the 200 per building,
Yeah.
regardless of the size of the building.
Regardless of the size of the building. You
So
still
like-
have that, so we're not limiting anything.
So then if they want to go on two sides, then they have to go to step number 2.
Well, if they want to,
which then is based
because they could
based
do
on
that.
linear footage of that side,
Mm-hmm.
up to 200 square foot per side.
Yep. And they could still use, if your building is, 50 by 200 and you wanted to have 100 foot on the front, you can still use that because you can still use the 200 square foot however you'd want, wherever you want. But once your building gets bigger, then you get the benefit of that larger building, so you can start getting past the 200. But you can only get past the 200 if your building is big enough.
So a 50 by 200, sorry.
So they could have 150 on the front and 200 on the side. Well, right, yeah, so they get the 200 on one side, and then they could do 150 on the other side. Yep.
So a 200 by 50, if I'm understanding correctly, they'd be allowed to go on two sides. They could do 200 on the long side, 50 square feet on the short side, or they could do 200 on the long side, 200 on the other long side. Correct? Based on what you're proposing?
Well,
Because it's based on the size. We're limited to 200 square foot per side.
Yeah.
And then if they split it up, it's based on the size
I-
of the side.
but then
they put
you're-
it on.
but then you're looking really at, on this calculation that I proposed, you'd be looking at 50 foot on the front and 200 on the side. That'd be 250 total.
But what if they put it on front and back? Can't they go 200 and 200?
Yeah.
So depending on the side they put it on, they're limited to the size of the sign on that
Yep.
side.
And if they
So
wanted,
100 by 200, they could go 100 square feet, 200 square feet, or 200, 200.
Yep.
Or 100, 100.
Right.
Depending on which sides they go on.
Yep.
I'm good with that if we can put it in words.
Sure, I'll go back and listen to the tape a couple of times and hopefully I can get it all together in some words.
So what I'm hearing is that you couldn't,
Yeah.
as a institutional zoned use, you couldn't mix and match between those two, but you could choose. I have a smaller building, I'm gonna use the street frontage calculation, and I'll have 200 max that I can use on one or more than one sign. Or if my building is big enough, I can not, the street, the lineal street frontage is out of the picture, and I'll strictly go by the sizes of the sides of my building, and I'll be limited in that fashion, or be able to grow in that fashion. Okay, that's interesting, yep.
It makes sense to me. I do still wanna ask about the part here where we had talked in the past about, the maximum number may be increased by conditional use permit. Would you want to leave that in or not have that at all?
I agree with Brian on that without a standard to go by, it'd be really, in some ways, it'd be nice just to say, yeah, everybody come here and we'll allow everybody, we'll look at it and see what works, but in practice, that's probably not the best way to do it, because we're not weighing it against anything. So that was.
It becomes real subjective.
Yeah.
And
It depends
I
on
don't think
who's
we
here
wanna
at the
get-
meeting.
Yeah, it depends on who's presenting. Do we like how it looks? Do we not like how it looks? So if we have at least some basic criteria to go by, so it's not based
So-
on, yeah, I
so-
feel good today or I don't feel good today.
That kid broke my that guy broke my bicycle 50 years ago in junior high. Yeah, that kind of thing. So you would like to take that part, not have that in at all?
I agree that what we're talking about with this option of the building size, probably in as far as I can foresee, which is far from perfect, but it gives some scalability to things with the many things that could be in an institutional zone. But I'll just, one comment about the conditional use though, with this language, I would agree. Then I wouldn't think we need the conditional use provision that's in this draft. But whenever we have a conditional use, I think it's because we don't have a set of criteria, and that's why we have a conditional use. So in general, I'd say that's probably where we always are when we have a conditional use in a provision. But in this case, if we're able to draft language towards this, I agree we wouldn't need it in this case.
And, you know, this is a new zone for us, you know, we've only had it probably about a year. So as things come and, you know, we get, something new or unique, we may have to address it again.
So Patrick, what would our timeline look on this? Would you see new language to consider at our next meeting and then maybe a public meeting, the first meeting in, public hearing, the first meeting in November then? Is that what we're looking at?
We'd have to look at how the 10 days notice in the paper comes out. We might already be, if you reviewed it at your next meeting, we might be looking at November.
Okay.
So I
Assuming
guess
that.
for hockey, at this point, they can at least go in and get one sign in, right? And then you could add because that's what your intent is, right? You want to put one sign facing the Aspen Park. Is it Aspen Drive? Is that what it's called?
Aspen Park Road.
Aspen Park Road, you want,
That's not a road.
and then eventually you
It's
want
not
to put
really
one
a road.
facing the highway, right?
Yeah, I already applied for the temporary permit for the signage. I just didn't want to order a sign that we'd tear down, I guess. So we could order the one.
So, do we look like we're okay on this and can move on to our next agenda item? So we're good on this for now. All right, item number 7, we're going to discuss, drive-through facilities.
I probably should have redlined and made more highlighted of the changes I made, but I went back and listened to the prior meeting and tried to incorporate what was talked about in there. I don't think we came up with a number on F, so that's kind of highlighted out, but I tried to better define the drive-through service facility as well as a stacking lane. And I added some language to shall provide at least 3 stacking spaces per stacking lane. In D, I think for the most part though, I tried to standardize the language to drive-through service facilities because it's not just a window, it could be the kiosk as well. There's a lot more to it than just a window. So then I added some language at the end. The sound walls, landscaping, and other mitigation measures may be required as part of the conditional use permit. So I added that as part of the I added some language in there. I'd have to go back and look at the previous version, but so I tried to update this based on what was talked about last time. Oh, I think the one was there was a separation distance from residential properties, but I tried to mirror the language for drive lanes in commercial districts that if you want to have them in the setbacks, you have to do it by conditional use.
Just a couple minor comments. So I know we talked about 3, and you know, and we've got a size for them, 20 foot each, so basically 60 feet. Maybe one thing we should add in here for clarification, to make it easy for Paul, is that the first one would start at the midpoint of the stacking space. So the car's sitting at either the window or the order kiosk. You know, usually that's centered on the car because it's on the driver's window. So if we say the first space would be centered on the kiosk or window or whatever, and then, what you have shown there in A about not interfering with, access to parking stalls, could we also add something about access, to and from the public, way? I didn't see anything in here about blocking of entrance and exit drives.
It does say,
I'm just concerned about if they're blocking an entrance drive, that it's not backing up traffic on the public way.
it says enter or leave parking areas, so I would think that'd be entering or exiting the facility.
Yeah, so maybe, if the intent is for both the parking lot and parking stalls, if we could just clarify that. Otherwise, I think it looks good.
So just to say it out loud, so the draft language here would, let's see, yeah, it makes it the same across all of our business districts, that a drive-through service facility is a conditional use that supports the principal use. Okay, and then I like the provision, and I noted that, just think about it, if this becomes ordinance and we're sitting in a conditional use hearing, that the section I at the end, it says speakers and other verbal communication devices shall be located and designed to minimize noise impacts. And then it says sound attenuation walls, landscaping, and other mitigation may be required as part of the conditional use permit. So that's something we could, I like that is in there, and it's a good thought process for myself, that if there happened to be a business that would apply for a drive-through service facility that was really close to residential, that's where that would come into play for me. So I'm glad that that's drafted and included.
Is there, have you ever seen, or does this even make sense, to put in there that at the property line, it couldn't, the speakers couldn't be more than such and such a decibel? Would that be, just so that there's something in there, is that possible, or is that?
Theoretically possible. I don't believe we have a sound meter though to actually measure. So we're technically limited by.
I'm just thinking, if you, yeah,
The police department handles, if there's a complaint about, construction, either myself or the police department, but usually it's after hours, before hours, police department goes and handles it on a one-by-one case, so. But we don't have construction hours.
I was wondering if we were able to have a sound, that way, if it's more than that, you can say, well, you gotta lower it, because that's the ordinance, but I don't know how you enforce that necessarily, but if it's a problem and you say, well, our ordinance says this, and you're above that, then you have to adjust it.
We do have things that say impacts can be felt, beyond the property line, whether noise, dust, vibration. With industrial businesses, the problem with setting a decibel number is, well, prove it.
That'd be easier to prove though than a vague thing is the only thing. So
It would be if we had a meter.
right, yeah. And I'm not trying to cause a problem. Just if you are specific, then, but that's fine.
You've got me thinking back to college days now. I think I remember a discussion like this in Brookings back in the day, where someone informed us that like, well, if you get, they had a provision like that and they maybe said something similar, like the Brookings PD does not have a noise meter, so they can't actually.
So do we think this looks good, or do we need to make a couple minor changes and then look at it again?
I had the couple of changes noted.
Just a couple of
that'll-
changes, so we'll look at it again maybe next meeting?
Yep.
Okay,
Is there anything pressing on this one?
No.
no. Okay. All right. Then we'll go on to number 8 for our next discussion item, commercial signage and billboards.
So we're back to signs.
Back
so-
to signs.
The developer of Brandon 90 Plaza has gotten several inquiries from prospective tenants wanting both larger and taller signs than what would be allowed in general business generally. Just because taller, their reasoning is because Brandon 90 kind of dips down in kind of a valley. So they want it to be able to stand out, to be seen going both directions. And just size-wise, of course, everyone wants a billboard. And right now, I want to say commercial is limited to 200 square feet. A typical billboard is between 600 and 800 square feet, somewhere in there. So the way some cities do it is, well, some just don't care and don't have a standard. But some do have some have zoning districts that are that in depth that you have a highway commercial zoning district that's basically general business, but the sign standards and other small things are different. Some do overlay districts where it's this is your base district, but this is additional regulation on it that modifies something. And that can, of course, the flexibility there is you could kind of draw where that is. So I just told them I would bring it up to you. They have gotten at least 2 that would be interested in quite a bit more signage for primarily visibility off of Interstate 90.
Any idea where these signs would be at?
So, yes. So, yes. One of the lots is where the retaining wall is going up. They have a potential person interested there. The other is in the middle of the circle. So I don't know if those signs would necessarily be there, or if they would, work out some agreement with someone that buys another lot that they would have their larger sign there, or however they want to do it. But I imagine the one in the center is going to be, the visibility is going to be especially important to them. But I wish I could say more about it, but
With Slurrock being a state highway, does the state have any regulations on that road as far as billboards, or no?
I don't know, not that I know of.
I mean, all signs, have to be on private property. So as long as it's on private property, the state wouldn't have any kind of restrictions.
Patrick, can you remind me how we address billboards? I couldn't find it in the ordinance.
So right now, in the commercial district, you are capped at 200. Where billboards would be allowed is if you have a large enough industrial lot. You could put a like Marmon Energy, you could put a billboard on their land near Interstate 90 because there is no cap on the size. It's just
So-
based on your frontage,
So it was based on light and heavy industrial was the only place you could put them?
basically.
Because there's one already at the grocery store. Was that grandfathered in?
The sunshine,
Yeah.
but that's, I would consider to be, you're right, Lamar came in and put a billboard sign under the previous regulations.
But that would be an exception and wouldn't be allowed anymore, correct?
If something came in and took it out, it would not be able to go back up, probably.
So I remember we addressed that one because they wanted to light it too. So right now, the only areas that allow billboards is the heavy industrial.
I think light as well, but yes, basically, it's, you'd be looking at the industrial parks that butt up on the interstate.
So they can't just put
Or
up,
I guess Encore Park, you could probably put one back in there, but.
they can't just put up giant flags. I'm sorry, I'm making a joke, like Perkins.
We sort of took billboard language out of the signs. But in the previous sign regulations, we used that term, but we don't really use that term anymore, so.
It's funny you bring up flags. Back in those, the signage on those other towns, there was a flag thing in there of like 40 feet and a certain size. I don't know what town it was, but it did have a size requirement.
My concern is, yeah, I see where they're wanting to go with this, is they want to advertise, travelers going back and forth on the interstate. So this is kind of a little bit of a unique situation. How does signage work with the DOT? You see these signs, eating establishments at the next exit, gas stations at the next exit. Is that going to be included as part of this new bypass work? Are they gonna include that type of signage for Brandon?
I imagine so. DOT has its own rules about signage in its right of ways. But
Which is exclusive from us.
yes, we just regulate the lots.
I was just curious if you guys had heard any that they were going to incorporate that for Brandon, because I don't think we have that now. The McDonald's and
Hopefully. I'm sure McDonald's would appreciate it, and Jimmy John's probably would.
I mean, the other way we could handle this is by variance. An applicant comes in, says you limit me to 30, it's not gonna work here. You give a variance because it's very specific and needed there, but it wouldn't necessarily apply to anyone else because of the circumstances. So if you wanna look at that, we handle by variance.
That goes back to variances are situations where you can't make feasible use of the property, cannot be used for reasons of convenience or profit. So,
with that, it's
So
like,
commercial
where do you draw
exist.
the line? Is it, is it 200 feet from the highway? Is it 400 feet? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? Where do you draw the line to giving that exception? Do you give it to just the properties that front the interstate? Then do you exclude the ones in the middle? Or if you give it to the ones in the middle, do you then exclude the Jimmy John's? And then if you give it to Jimmy John's, well, then do you give it to the gas station and the Gruff, and how far up Split Rock at what point do we say yes, and at what point do we say no? That's where it gets hard.
I'm sure a lot of the businesses want people who are driving on the interstate to be able to see the sign. But if you're the only guy who has a sign, that's great. But if there are 10 of them, if there are 15 of them, then are people who are driving on the interstate going to be able to see them all? They're going to have time to read them all. It's just going to look like a big cluster of signage. So then our problem would be, who do we give them to and who do we not give them to? And I know you can only put a sign so close to the interstate. I mean, you have to be so far back from the interstate, right? So,
Well, the entire sign must be on private property, but there's
Oh,
no
yeah.
setback for signs.
from the interstate?
It has to be on private property,
Oh, yeah,
the entire sign.
okay,
The federal government does have
the federal government.
distance a billboard would have to be
Yeah.
off of like.
So
I-90,
my
that
question
kinda
was,
thing.
does
There
this-
is a buffer zone.
Yeah, does the state have that too? Does the state say, well, it has to be at least this far back from the road? But I guess there are signs that are right up by the road. So,
This is a tough one, you know, on one hand, you know, we don't want our sign to be our town to be a bunch of signs. But on the other hand, you know, I know there's a lot of communities, especially when you get out in the mountain areas, you know, like Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and some areas in Colorado where they don't allow any signs over like 8 feet high, and you can't find what you're looking for. I mean, you can't find a gas station, you can't find a McDonald's, you know, and you're looking for it. So it's hard. Where do we find a comfort zone?
Alaska,
But yet be fair to all the businesses in town.
Alaska doesn't allow billboards at all. Or at least they did, and I don't know what the current law is.
I'm seeing a lot of trends in these newer cities that they don't allow signs over, I think, like 8 or 10 feet high above grade. You know, and that's becoming more and more common. But yet, if you're from out of town and you can't find what you're looking for because it's not visible from the street, you know, so it almost becomes a hazard because you're kind of slowing down and looking down each street. And, you know, at least for me, I am a hazard when I'm trying to find a gas station or trying to find a fast food place to stop.
Just, that's what GPS is for.
That development is general business?
Correct. So their height is 30, I think it is. So that a little bit more than 10, but they obviously want you to be able to see it from quite a ways, especially if it's down in.
To me, that would be a perfect opportunity to allow them to put signage on the north side of their building. Because as a citizen of Brandon, I could care less if there's a sign on the front and an additional sign facing the highway.
Is that street in there, would that be the calculation for frontage, or?
So it would. It is a private street, but it is frontage. It's private street frontage.
I could just see the first one comes in, I want it, X feet tall and X feet big. So then the next guy comes in and says, well, people will never be able to see my sign behind that. Mine has to be X plus 10, and then the next guy is, I need to be X plus 20, and each one will want bigger and taller than the guy before. Is this something we need to decide on to make any kind of?
Nope. If you want me to
Decision.
pursue one direction, if we just want to think about it for a couple weeks, if we just want to abandon it entirely, well, whatever you want me to do, we'll go down that road.
I do agree that it could become almost a war of the signs, and it could be too much too, because there's gonna be I don't know how many plats there are there, but there's gonna be a lot of signs there already, and if there was a bigger building, a lot of these are kind of smaller buildings, but if there was a bigger building, we wanted to look at building frontage calculation on that too, you know, maybe, but I'm hesitant to expand it too much, cause there's gonna be a lot of signs already. And if we increase the square footage on one, they're all gonna want bigger, so it gets multiplied pretty quick.
Are they asking for size increase? Are they asking for height increase? What are they asking for specifically?
To them, ideally both. I'm sure they'd take whatever you can give them, but
The height,
I
the height for sure.
yes.
And for the height, is this sign located in the center there? Is that where the sign would be?
Likely, yes. They might also work out, just speculating, an agreement with somebody else to have more of an interstate visibility sign as well. But I don't know how exactly what they want to lay out their sign.
Because I guess our biggest concern would be the impact that it would have on the residential just to the south of there. So if it was specifically facing the interstate, you know, that might not have as much impact as if it was just a big sign out in the middle.
As I travel, you're driving down the interstate and here's an exit. You can see, oh, there's my favorite fast food place. Oh, there's my favorite sports bar, and they're big signs and they're coming straight up from the building and they're lighted at night. And there's a lot to think about.
I do think that I would be, I do think that I'd find it difficult to make a lot of changes to the general business district as a whole with increased signage and increased sign height. Cause I don't, I wouldn't wanna see it spread through the city on all general business properties or potentially, so. But I see the uniqueness of this. I know, Patrick, one thing you mentioned was that, you mentioned it tonight too, it was also in your memo that kind of an overlay district is an option. I read a little, that actually appeared in some of the materials for the first signage thing we talked about tonight. Is that the kind of thing that could be, I don't know how much we're getting into if we consider that option. Is that something to be tailored to? I mean, for Brandon, it would probably be only applicable to the Interstate 90 fronted area. Is there a way it could be tailored to that?
With an overlay district, you would write the rules and then we would basically readopt a zoning map with it overlaid where you want it to be.
Well, food for thought, and we can address this again at a later meeting.
Yep.
Okay. We'll move on to number 9 on our agenda then. The comprehensive plan memo. This is something we've been talking about for a while, and we've even had a community survey.
We sent out a survey a while back. We'll probably have to do a new one because that was longer than I would have liked it, longer ago than I would have liked it to been. But so kind of a general layout of the comp plan. I just wanted to get your feedback on if there's something glaringly obvious that should be in there that I haven't accounted for. The introduction is your common thing, acknowledging the people that participated in it, what it is, its relation to zoning and grants and everything Tammy does and capital improvements plan. All that is designed to take you from your comp plan where we currently are to where your future you want to be. And hopefully you do a good job of it and you get from current to future. So that's kind of the goal there. It just lays out why it exists, how you use it. The community profile is all your fun demographics kind of thing. What I've thought about adding, and I have thrown kind of, it's an older version of it, but you do have it on your desktops. So one big thing is in this area is housing. We've talked about housing a lot of times. Kind of the standard, what you hear is that people should spend no more than roughly 30% of their income on housing. To some people that makes sense. To a lot of people that number is substantially higher. But if you look at that number kind of broken down by what people's average wage is from Department of Labor data, how that breaks out, what price range of housing do we need, where should we be investing that kind of thing. So public facilities, obviously everything has a life. Sitting in the building we're in now, there's obviously a lifespan on it, as well as City Hall and the Public Works building and the Parks Department building and the water treatment plant. They all have a lifespan that eventually things need to be replaced, and there is a cost there. The water treatment plant was $24 million. So there is a substantial cost, and so development considerations are, your topography and wetlands and your floodplains and your hills and all that natural stuff, as well as it takes a lot of money to move poop uphill. So there's that cost in there where you generally, development goes where it's easiest to do first, kind of like water. Water goes where it's easiest to do first, and then when there's nothing left, it goes in the difficult places. So where our growth boundaries are, what we can service. Chapter 5 is probably the biggest new section. Obviously, you hope at a certain point that a development at least pays for itself. You don't want to just be permitting a bunch of things, but the long-term cost of those things generate less money than what we actually spend on them. That's a good way to go bankrupt real quick. So our two primary methods of income, we get grants, and there are, state grants and loans and all that kind of thing, but we primarily depend on property tax and sales tax. So we would look at what a particular probably zoning type as well as land use generates in terms of property tax and sales tax. What does it cost to get services to those places, and what happens when we have to replace all these things that cost a lot of money. I want to say the sewer built out with water and sewer and gas and all that you said was about $850 a foot. So you would hope that you're servicing these places with those services at $850 a foot, that you would at least be in property tax and sales tax be getting back $850 a foot. So that's going to be a whole lot of graphs and charts and fun stuff. So then planning policy goals and objectives goes into how do we reach that where we're at least balanced out? What do our goals want to be moving forward? If it's would every new development need to have a certain mixture of uses to be fiscally sustainable? Then we get into how we implement those goals in what currently is the city of Brandon, and then how we implement them in our growth areas, and it would go into all that. And chapter 9 will probably be very long with facts and figures explaining everything. So that's kind of a rough layout of what it might look like.
And we're thinking the comprehensive plan would be a 30-year plan, probably, or 20. What do you think?
Usually, just by the time you get past probably 20, 25 years, we've seen the growth we've had in 20, 25 years. Probably thinking back to 1990, even 2000 was 25 years ago. So Brandon's a lot different than it was in 2000. So the comp plan will be something that will probably constantly have to be reevaluated, especially since here soon we'll have 1,000 lots open for development. If you consider 2.5 people or whatever live in a house, that's A significant change in population.
Oh, yeah. So it's kind of a long-term plan, but kind of more of a short-term plan in our case, cause we grow. Yeah.
So, nothing we need feedback on right away. I just kind of wanted to give you a 500-foot overhead layout. If you can think of something you'd really like to see in there, it's kind of what we make it. We hopefully, if we spend all this time on it, you want it to be actually something useful that just doesn't sit on a shelf and we'll pick it up again in 25 years. And hopefully things went all right.
I guess from a planning and zoning standpoint, I think, in my mind anyway, I think the most important thing to us is the land use and proposed land use. And obviously we can say, hey, we want residential here, we want business here, we want industrial here. We can't dictate what developers are going to want to do, and if and when landowners are going to want to sell. But on the other hand, what we need to avoid is things like when somebody wants to come in and do a big development, that we're not filling the room because, hey, when I built this house, I wasn't expecting that to go in across the street from me. And, what can we do to avoid that? Because we're starting to see that a lot more in the past few years as developers are coming in and developing these large parcels of property. And it's no longer just additional houses. Brandon isn't growing by just adding houses anymore. We have to add the things that people don't like.
We're adding whole neighborhoods at a time.
Yeah. I mean, we have to add, high density, residential, we have to add industrial, we have to,
Commercial.
those are things that we have to have in order for this community to continue to grow and thrive, so. I don't know what the answer is, but,
Yeah.
as this group, that's what we're seeing a lot more of is, not in my backyard.
Something to prioritize as we go through this.
Right.
Also, with the river going through here, and we have to make sure that we have, where one section of town has access to another section of town, we need to make sure that our roads, go from one place to another, where people can get from one place to another. So that, I feel that that's very important too. So it looks good. I'm looking forward to digging into it. And I've been through a comp plan update in the past, and there were some really long meetings. So not really looking forward to that, but looking forward to the work.
I'm hoping to find some meetings where we're not keeping you here till 9 or 10 at night, because that's probably not great on a Thursday, because that then throws off your Friday and probably your whole weekend. So we'll try to keep it manageable.
Yeah. That's all right. And then, so next is just a review of the building permits. It looks here like we have, new single-family homes, 37 to date, compared to 12 to date from last year, so that's quite a bit. And 145 multifamily units to date here in town. That's well, let's see, 37 plus 145 is 182. 182, and you figure 2.5 people per residence, maybe, or at least two. That's another 400 people here in town so far this year.
Well, those are just permits. People aren't living in all of them yet, but they're coming. Yeah. Yeah, they're not all built already yet.
So then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd bring so moved.
Totes second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Meeting is adjourned. And it is 7:57 PM.